Security, remove him from the lobby. The sentence sliced through the quiet air of the Aurora Grand Hotel like a blade. Conversation stopped. The soft jazz music drifting from hidden ceiling speakers suddenly felt louder against the silence. Every head in the marble lobby turned toward the same direction. Near the center seating area, beside a polished brass coffee table and two ivory leather chairs, stood a tall black man wearing a simple charcoal hoodie, dark jeans, and sneakers that had clearly seen better days. He wasn't loud. He wasn't arguing. He wasn't even moving. Marcus Carter simply stood there with his hands resting loosely at his sides, looking calmly at the man who had just ordered him out. Gregory Whitman, the hotel's general manager, stood behind the front desk with his arms folded across a perfectly tailored navy suit. His expression carried the confidence of someone used to being obeyed instantly. The Aurora Grand was one of Manhattan's most prestigious hotels, a place where crystal chandeliers hung 20 feet above the marble floor and where rooms regularly cost over $2,000 a night. The kind of place where people arrived in town cars and left in silence. The kind of place where appearances mattered. And right now, Gregory Whitman had decided that Marcus Carter did not belong here. "You heard me," Gregory said again, louder this time, making sure the words carried across the lobby. "This area is reserved for registered guests." A security guard standing near the elevator bank shifted slightly, glancing toward Marcus as if waiting for instructions. Marcus did not react. He didn't protest. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked around the lobby slowly, taking in the scene the way someone might observe a painting they'd seen before. A few guests were watching openly now. A couple seated near the bar paused mid-conversation. A businessman standing by the concierge desk lowered his phone just enough to see what was happening. And behind the front desk, a young receptionist named Emily Brooks felt a tight knot forming in her stomach. She had only worked at the Aurora Grand for 6 months, but she already knew something about moments like this. The tension was subtle but unmistakable. It was the kind of silence that made people hold their breath without realizing it. Marcus Carter finally spoke, his voice calm and steady. "Are you sure you want to do this?" The question wasn't loud, but it carried. Gregory let out a short laugh, the kind that suggested he thought the situation was already settled. "Sir, I'm absolutely sure," he said. "You've been asked twice to leave the lobby unless you have a reservation." Marcus tilted his head slightly, as if considering the statement. Around them the lobby lights reflected off polished stone columns and gold trim. Somewhere near the restaurant entrance a server paused with a tray of sparkling water glasses, watching the scene unfold. "Interesting," Marcus said quietly. Gregory's smile tightened. "Interesting," he repeated. "Yes," Marcus replied. "Because I walked in through the front doors like any other guest." Gregory leaned forward across the counter, placing both palms against the marble surface as if anchoring the moment. "Let me make this simple," he said. "This hotel maintains certain standards. If you're not staying here, you can't linger in the lobby." Marcus nodded slowly, almost thoughtfully. "And how exactly did you determine that I'm not staying here?" Gregory's eyes flicked briefly over Marcus's hoodie and worn sneakers before returning to his face. "Experience," Gregory answered. The word hung in the air longer than it should have. Emily Brooks felt her fingers tighten around the edge of the keyboard in front of her. She glanced at the reservation screen out of habit, though she hadn't been asked to check anything yet. Something about the exchange felt wrong, but Gregory Whitman had run the Aurora Grand for nearly 8 years. People didn't challenge his judgment. On the other side of the lobby, a man in his early 30s named Daniel Parks slowly lifted his phone. At first it was just curiosity. Moments like this tended to dissolve quickly once someone walked away. But something about Marcus Carter's stillness made Daniel hesitate. Marcus didn't look embarrassed. He didn't look angry either. If anything, he looked patient. Gregory straightened his jacket. "Security," he said without taking his eyes off Marcus. The guard near the elevator began walking across the lobby, his steps measured and professional. "Sir," Gregory continued, "I'm going to ask you one final time to leave." Marcus turned his head slightly toward the approaching guard, and then back to Gregory. "You know," Marcus said, almost conversationally, "this lobby hasn't changed much." Gregory blinked, thrown off by the comment. "Excuse me." Marcus looked up toward the chandeliers that hung overhead like frozen fireworks. Same marble, same lighting design, same ridiculous chairs. A faint murmur rippled through the nearby guests. Gregory's expression hardened. I don't see how that's relevant. Marcus smiled faintly. It's relevant, he said. The guard stopped a few feet away, unsure whether he was supposed to intervene yet. Emily's eyes darted back to her screen. Almost without thinking, she typed the name Marcus Carter into the internal system. The cursor blinked for a moment. Then the search results appeared. Emily felt the breath leave her lungs. She leaned closer to the monitor, reading the information again to make sure she hadn't misunderstood. The reservation line wasn't just any booking. It was labeled in bold letters, owner-level access. Emily's heart started racing. She looked up quickly at Marcus, then back down at the screen. The system displayed a suite reservation on the top-floor penthouse, an area most staff members never even saw. Gregory was still speaking. Sir, if you don't leave voluntarily, we'll have to escort you outside. Marcus looked at him carefully. Escort me, he repeated. Gregory nodded once, confident again. Yes. The guard shifted his weight slightly, waiting for the signal. Marcus exhaled slowly through his nose, almost like someone amused by a long-running joke. That would be unfortunate, he said. Daniel Park's phone was definitely recording now. He wasn't the only one. 2 other guests had quietly lifted their phones as well. Gregory noticed the movement and straightened his shoulders, suddenly aware that people were watching. If anything, that made him double down. This isn't complicated, Gregory said firmly. The Aurora Grand is a private establishment. We reserve the right to maintain a certain environment for our guests. Marcus glanced around the lobby once more. His eyes moved from the front desk to the bar to the sweeping staircase that curved up toward the mezzanine level. I agree, he said. Gregory frowned slightly. You agree? Marcus nodded. Absolutely. The guard took one small step forward. Emily's voice finally broke through the tension. Mr. Whitman, she said quietly. Gregory didn't look at her. Not now, Emily. She swallowed. Sir, I think. Gregory turned his head sharply. Emily. The warning in his voice was unmistakable. The lobby went silent again. Marcus reached into his pocket. Gregory's eyes narrowed immediately. Sir, don't make this more difficult. But Marcus simply pulled out his phone and held it loosely. In his hand. I'm not, he said calmly. He tapped the screen once and lifted the phone to his ear. Gregory watched with open irritation. Calling someone to come get you? He asked. Marcus looked directly at him. Something like that. The call connected. Marcus's voice remained perfectly level. Linda, he said. A pause. Yes, I'm at the Aurora Grand. Gregory scoffed quietly. Of course you are. Marcus continued speaking into the phone. I need you to activate owner verification for this location. Emily felt her pulse spike. Gregory's smile faded slightly. Owner verification? He repeated under his breath. Marcus lowered the phone just enough to look at Gregory again. Yes, he said. 10 seconds passed. Behind the front desk, the monitors flickered. Emily stared as the system interface abruptly shifted. A red authorization banner appeared across every screen. Gregory turned instinctively toward the monitors. His face drained of color as the name appeared across the display in large capital letters. Marcus Carter, owner access granted. The red authorization banner remained glowing across every monitor behind the front desk, as if the building itself had just spoken. For a long second, no one in the lobby moved. The soft jazz music continued playing somewhere above them, but now it sounded distant, almost surreal against the silence that had taken over the room. Gregory Whitman stared at the screen in front of him. His eyes moved slowly across the words as though reading them again might somehow change the outcome. Marcus Carter, owner access granted. The same message repeated on every monitor behind the counter. Emily Brooks felt her hands begin to tremble slightly on the keyboard. She had seen the name in the system only moments earlier, but seeing it confirmed across the entire hotel network felt different. This was no longer a possibility. It was a fact. The security guard who had been standing a few feet away from Marcus shifted his posture subtly, suddenly unsure where he should be standing or who he was supposed to be assisting. The guests in the lobby sensed the shift immediately. Daniel Park lowered his phone for a moment, then lifted it again, realizing that what was unfolding in front of him had just taken a completely different direction. Gregory finally blinked and looked back at Marcus Carter. For the first time since the confrontation began, the certainty in his expression was gone. In its place was something more complicated. Confusion mixed with disbelief. What is this? Gregory asked quietly, almost to himself. Marcus did not answer immediately. He stood calmly in the same spot where he had been since the beginning, holding his phone loosely in his hand. His posture had not changed. His voice had not raised. The only difference now was that the entire lobby seemed to be looking at him differently. "It is exactly what it says," Marcus replied. Gregory turned sharply toward Emily. "This has to be some kind of system error," he said quickly. "Check it again." Emily swallowed and glanced back at the screen. The system displayed multiple confirmations: reservation status, penthouse access credentials, ownership verification markers that very few employees ever saw during their entire careers. She knew what it meant, but saying it out loud felt almost impossible. "It is not an error, sir," she said carefully. Gregory stared at her as if expecting a different answer. When none came, he looked back at the monitor. The red banner remained steady. Around them the lobby had grown even quieter. The couple sitting near the bar were no longer pretending to have a conversation. The businessman near the concierge desk had taken 2 steps closer without realizing it. Daniel Park continued filming, though now he was doing it with a sense of disbelief rather than curiosity. Marcus finally lowered his phone from his ear. The call had ended minutes earlier, but he still held the device as if it were simply another part of the moment. "Gregory Whitman," he said calmly. Hearing his full name spoken that way made Gregory straighten slightly. "Yes," he replied automatically. Marcus looked at him with quiet patience. "You said this hotel maintains certain standards." Gregory hesitated. "Yes," he said again, though the word carried far less authority than before. Marcus nodded slowly. "I agree with that," he said. Gregory frowned slightly, uncertain where the conversation was going. Marcus took a few steps forward, stopping a comfortable distance from the front desk. The security guard instinctively stepped aside to give him space. "Standards matter," Marcus continued. "Service matters. Respect matters." His voice was calm but deliberate, as if he were speaking not only to Gregory but to the entire room, especially in places like this. Gregory glanced again at the monitor, then back at Marcus. "If this is some kind of misunderstanding," he began quickly, "we can certainly clarify." Marcus lifted a hand gently, not to interrupt rudely, but to slow the moment. Gregory stopped talking. "There is no misunderstanding," Marcus said. The words were not loud, but they carried the quiet weight of certainty. Emily noticed something else on the screen as the system refreshed. Additional notifications were appearing. Internal alerts. Executive access confirmations. The Aurora Grand's management dashboard had automatically opened under owner credentials. That level of access could only come from one place: the top. Gregory noticed the change as well. His eyes moved across the new information appearing on the screen. A bead of sweat formed at his temple. The guests were beginning to whisper among themselves now. A woman near the staircase leaned toward her companion and murmured something that sounded like, "Did he say owner?" Daniel Park turned his phone slightly, so the camera captured both Marcus and the monitors behind the desk. Marcus seemed completely unaffected by the growing attention. If anything, he looked as though he had been expecting the moment all along. He glanced around the lobby again, studying the details with the same calm curiosity he had shown earlier. "You know," Marcus said thoughtfully, "when we renovated this property 6 years ago, we debated replacing this entire floor." Gregory blinked, caught off guard by the comment. Marcus gestured lightly toward the marble tiles beneath their feet. "Italian marble. Imported. Very expensive." He smiled faintly. The design team insisted it would make the lobby feel timeless. No one interrupted him. Not Gregory. Not the guests. Even the jazz music seemed quieter now. "I approve the decision," Marcus continued. Gregory's shoulders stiffened. "You approved it," he repeated slowly. Marcus nodded. "Yes." The word landed softly but carried unmistakable meaning. Emily felt her heart pounding in her chest. The security guard straightened his posture again, this time with a different kind of awareness. Gregory looked down at the monitor one more time, as if hoping the red banner might disappear. It did not. Marcus Carter. Owner access granted. Marcus rested his hands casually in the pockets of his hoodie. "You said something earlier," he continued. Gregory swallowed. "I said several things," he replied cautiously. Marcus nodded once. "You said this hotel is for registered guests." Gregory's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. "Yes," he said quietly. Marcus tilted his head slightly. "And you decided that I did not belong here." Gregory hesitated. For a moment, he seemed ready to defend the decision. But the words would not come. The evidence was glowing directly behind him on every screen. The guests were watching. His own staff were watching. Marcus watched him patiently, without anger and without urgency. The silence stretched just long enough to become uncomfortable. Finally, Gregory spoke again. "If there has been a mistake," he said carefully, "I would like to apologize." The sentence sounded practiced, like something he had said many times during his career. Marcus studied him for a moment. "A mistake," he repeated quietly. Gregory nodded quickly. "Yes." Marcus glanced briefly toward Emily, and then back to Gregory. "That depends on how you define the word," he said. The lobby remained still, waiting for whatever would come next. Marcus Carter did not raise his voice. He did not accuse. He simply stood there, the calm center of a moment that had already begun to change the entire atmosphere of the Aurora Grand. Gregory Whitman stood very still behind the marble counter. And for the first time since the confrontation began, he looked like a man who had lost control of a room he believed he owned. The silence inside the Aurora Grand lobby had changed shape again. It was no longer the tense silence of suspicion. Now it was the kind of silence people hold when they realize they have just watched a moment shift into something irreversible. Marcus Carter remained exactly where he had been standing, his hands still resting casually in the pockets of his hoodie, his posture relaxed as though the entire situation were unfolding at a pace he had expected all along. Gregory cleared his throat. The sound was small, but it echoed across the polished marble floor more loudly than he intended. "Mr. Carter," he began, choosing his words carefully now. "If there has been any confusion tonight, I want to make it clear that our intention is always to provide excellent service." Marcus watched him quietly. Gregory continued speaking, his voice regaining a trace of the confidence he had worn earlier, though it now sounded forced. "Sometimes situations happen quickly. Staff members make assumptions based on incomplete information." He gestured toward the front desk monitors as if they were responsible for the entire misunderstanding. "Technology does not always display the full picture immediately." Emily Brooks felt her stomach tighten slightly at the explanation. The system had displayed the full picture the moment she searched the name. She had seen the owner access markers appear instantly, but she said nothing. Marcus tilted his head a fraction. "Incomplete information," he repeated slowly. Gregory nodded. "Exactly." Marcus let the words sit in the air for a moment before responding. "That is interesting," he said calmly. Gregory blinked, unsure whether the comment was agreement or criticism. Marcus took a slow step toward the desk. The movement was small, but it shifted the entire focus of the room. The guests watching from the seating area leaned forward slightly without realizing it. Daniel Park adjusted the angle of his phone so the camera captured both Marcus and Gregory clearly. Marcus rested one hand lightly on the marble counter. "Tell me something, Gregory," he said. Hearing his name spoken again with that calm precision made Gregory's shoulders stiffen. "When you first saw me walk through those doors tonight," Marcus continued, "what exactly did you see?" Gregory hesitated. "I saw someone who appeared to be lingering in the lobby without checking in," he said carefully. Marcus nodded once. "Appeared," he said. Gregory shifted his weight slightly. "Yes." Marcus looked around the room again, letting his gaze move slowly across the chandelier light reflecting on the marble floor, the tall windows facing the street, the polished brass railing along the staircase. "You know what I saw when I walked in?" he asked. Gregory did not answer. Marcus continued anyway. "I saw a hotel that I remember very well." Gregory frowned slightly. Marcus gestured toward the ceiling again. "Same lighting fixtures we approved in the renovation. Same seating layout. Even the same piano player in the lounge on Thursday nights." Several guests exchanged glances at that detail. The piano in the lounge had indeed been part of the hotel's weekly routine for years. Marcus looked back at Gregory. "It is remarkable how little things change when a building is working properly." Gregory attempted a polite smile. "We take pride in maintaining consistency." Marcus returned the smile faintly. "Do you?" Gregory nodded quickly. "Absolutely." Marcus's eyes held his for a moment longer. "Consistency is important," he said. Gregory relaxed slightly, believing the conversation was moving toward common ground. "Yes, exactly." Marcus straightened from the counter and slipped both hands back into his pockets. "Consistency in service," he continued. "Consistency in professionalism." Gregory nodded again. Of course. Marcus paused just long enough for the next words to carry more weight. Consistency in respect. Gregory's smile faded slightly. The guests nearby noticed it immediately. The businessman near the concierge desk folded his arms slowly as he continued watching. Marcus's voice remained calm, almost reflective. I visit many properties around the country, he said. Some of them belong to my company. Some of them belong to competitors. One thing I always notice first is how the staff treats people who walk through the door. Gregory swallowed. Our staff treats everyone with respect, he said quickly. Marcus raised an eyebrow slightly. Everyone. Gregory hesitated. That is certainly our policy. Emily stared at the keyboard in front of her, wishing she could disappear into the desk. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Policy, he said quietly. Gregory's confidence flickered again. Marcus turned his head slightly toward the guests who had gathered closer to the front desk. Policies are interesting things, he continued. They look very good on paper. Daniel Park's phone continued recording steadily. Marcus looked back at Gregory. But a policy only matters when people follow it. Gregory opened his mouth as if to respond, but Marcus spoke again before he could. Earlier tonight you said something that caught my attention. Gregory felt the tension in his chest tighten. What was that? He asked. Marcus met his eyes. You said this hotel maintains certain standards. Gregory nodded cautiously. Yes. Marcus took another small step forward. I agree with that statement, he said. Gregory looked confused again. You do? Marcus nodded once. Absolutely. His tone remained steady, but the calmness in his voice carried a quiet authority that now filled the room more effectively than any raised voice could have. Standards are the reason this hotel exists, Marcus continued. They are the reason guests choose to stay here. They are the reason this property earns the reputation it does. Gregory felt a small surge of relief at hearing the words. Exactly, he said quickly. Marcus watched him carefully. But standards are not measured by marble floors, he added. Gregory's relief vanished as quickly as it appeared. Marcus gestured toward the front doors of the Aurora Grand, where the glass reflected the city lights outside. They are measured by moments, he said. Gregory remained silent. Marcus continued speaking, his voice still. Quiet, but now unmistakably firm. Moments like when someone walks through the door and the staff decides whether that person belongs. The words settled across the lobby with a clarity that made several guests shift uncomfortably in their seats. Gregory's face flushed slightly. Mr. Carter, I believe you are interpreting. Marcus lifted his hand again gently. Gregory stopped mid-sentence. Marcus looked at him calmly. Do not misunderstand me, he said. I am not angry. That statement surprised almost everyone in the room. Gregory blinked. You are not. Marcus shook his head slightly. No. He glanced once more around the lobby, as if observing the architecture again. I am interested. Gregory frowned. Interested? Marcus nodded. Yes. He looked directly at Gregory again. Because moments like this tell me more about a property than any report I read. The front desk monitors continued displaying the red ownership banner behind Gregory. The message had not disappeared. Marcus Carter. Owner access granted. Gregory felt the weight of the words pressing on him from both sides now, from the screens behind him and the man standing in front of him. Marcus spoke again after a short pause. Tell me honestly, he said. Gregory hesitated. Honestly. Marcus nodded. When you asked security to remove me from this lobby earlier tonight, what exactly did you believe you were protecting? Gregory struggled to answer. The silence stretched again, and this time it felt far heavier than before. Gregory Whitman opened his mouth, but no words came out immediately. The question Marcus Carter had asked was simple, but the answer suddenly felt dangerous. What exactly had he believed he was protecting when he ordered security to remove the man standing in front of him? The silence in the Aurora Grand lobby deepened as the seconds passed. Guests were no longer pretending to mind their own business. They were openly watching now, some standing from their chairs to get a clearer view of the front desk. Daniel Park continued holding his phone steady, the camera quietly capturing every second of the exchange. Gregory finally inhaled and forced himself to speak. I believed I was protecting the experience of our guests, he said carefully. Marcus Carter did not react immediately. He simply looked at him, studying the answer with the same calm attention he had shown all evening. The experience of your guests, Marcus repeated slowly. Gregory nodded. Yes. Marcus glanced around the lobby again. The room looked exactly as it had 20 minutes earlier. The chandeliers still shimmered above the marble floor. The soft music still floated through the ceiling speakers. The city lights still glowed through the tall glass doors facing the street. Yet the atmosphere had changed completely. Interesting, Marcus said quietly. Gregory shifted uncomfortably. Marcus continued speaking, his voice calm but deliberate. So when I walked through the front doors tonight, you believe my presence was a threat to the experience of your guests. Gregory immediately shook his head. No, that is not exactly what I meant. Marcus raised an eyebrow slightly. Then help me understand, he said. Gregory glanced briefly toward the guests who were now watching the conversation with obvious interest. His voice lowered slightly, as if he hoped that would make the moment less public. You were standing in the lobby without checking in, he said. Marcus nodded. For approximately 4 minutes, he replied. Gregory hesitated. The precision of the answer made him glance again at the monitor behind the desk. Marcus noticed the movement. Yes, Marcus continued calmly. The security cameras record time very accurately. Emily Brooks felt her heartbeat quicken again. Marcus turned his attention back to Gregory. During those 4 minutes, he said, I watched several guests walk through this lobby. Gregory said nothing. Marcus continued. Some of them were dressed very formally. Some of them were not. The businessman near the concierge desk shifted slightly as Marcus spoke. Marcus gestured gently toward the entrance. One man came in wearing running shoes and gym clothes, he said. Another guest walked in carrying 2 shopping bags and a baseball cap. Gregory looked confused by the details. Marcus kept speaking in the same steady voice. No one stopped them, he said. Gregory remained silent. Marcus met his eyes again. But when I walked through the door, you noticed immediately. Gregory felt the attention of the entire lobby settle on him again. Mr. Carter, he said carefully. Hotel staff are trained to observe behavior. Marcus nodded once. Yes, he said. Observation is important. Gregory relaxed slightly, believing he had found common ground again. Marcus tilted his head a fraction. But observation requires interpretation, he added. Gregory felt the small opening close again. Marcus took a slow step away from the counter and walked a few feet across the lobby floor. The movement was unhurried, almost reflective. Guests instinctively shifted to make room as he passed. He stopped near one of the seating areas and rested his hand lightly on the back of an ivory chair. Do you know what I saw when I stood here earlier tonight? He asked. Gregory did not answer. Marcus continued anyway. I saw a lobby that looked exactly the way it was designed to look, he said. Elegant, comfortable, expensive. A faint ripple of quiet agreement moved through the guests standing nearby. Marcus turned slightly, so he could see both Gregory and the rest of the room. But I also saw something else, he said. Gregory felt the tension return to his chest. What was that? He asked. Marcus looked at him calmly. I saw a moment of decision, he said. The words landed softly but carried unmistakable weight. Every person who works in a place like this makes hundreds of decisions every day, Marcus continued. Small ones. Quick ones. Most of them go unnoticed. Gregory remained silent. Marcus walked slowly back toward the front desk. But occasionally, he said, one of those decisions reveals something important. The front desk monitors still displayed the red ownership banner behind Gregory. Marcus Carter. Owner access granted. Marcus rested his hand on the marble counter again. Tonight you made one of those decisions, he said. Gregory shifted his posture again, struggling to regain control of the conversation. If you were suggesting that my actions were motivated by anything inappropriate, he said carefully, I would strongly disagree. Marcus looked at him thoughtfully. I have not suggested anything, he replied. Gregory hesitated. Marcus continued speaking. I simply asked what you believed you were protecting. Gregory glanced again at the guests watching them. The entire lobby felt like a stage now. The reputation of the hotel, he said finally. Marcus nodded slowly. The reputation, he repeated. Gregory straightened his shoulders, attempting to regain his earlier authority. Yes, he said. A property like this must maintain a certain atmosphere. Marcus smiled faintly. Atmosphere, he said quietly. Gregory nodded. Marcus looked around the room again, letting his gaze settle briefly on the guests who had gathered nearby. Atmosphere is an interesting concept, he said. Gregory frowned slightly. Marcus continued speaking in the same calm tone that had filled the room since the beginning of the confrontation. Some people believe atmosphere comes from chandeliers and marble floors. He said, Others believe it comes from how people are treated the moment they walk through the door. The guests nearest the front desk exchanged glances again. Gregory felt the weight of the statement immediately. Marcus looked back at him. "Tonight you made a decision about the atmosphere of this hotel," he said. Gregory felt the room growing warmer around him. "I was performing my job," he said quickly. Marcus nodded once. "Yes," he said. "That is exactly what interests me." Gregory blinked. "What do you mean?" Marcus leaned forward slightly on the counter. "You were performing your job," he repeated. Gregory nodded cautiously. Marcus held his gaze for a moment before speaking again. "The question is," he said calmly, "what exactly did you believe your job required you to see when I walked through that door?" The silence that followed felt heavier than any moment that had come before it. Even the music in the lobby seemed to fade beneath the weight of the question as the entire room waited for Gregory Whitman to answer. Gregory Whitman felt the weight of Marcus Carter's question pressing down on the entire lobby like a heavy curtain that had suddenly dropped across the room. The silence stretched long enough for every person watching to feel it. "What exactly did you believe your job required you to see when I walked through that door?" Gregory shifted his posture behind the marble counter, his fingers briefly touching the polished surface as if it could anchor him. The chandeliers above them reflected light across the floor, the same calm glow that had illuminated thousands of ordinary check-ins over the years. Yet tonight the light felt sharper, exposing every expression in the room. Gregory cleared his throat again. "My job requires me to evaluate situations quickly," he said. His voice sounded controlled but tighter than before. Marcus Carter did not interrupt. He simply watched. Gregory continued speaking as if the explanation might restore the structure of the moment. "We manage a very high-profile property," he said. "Security, reputation, guest comfort. These are constant priorities." Marcus nodded once, encouraging him to continue. Gregory took a breath and gestured lightly toward the lobby seating area. When someone enters the hotel and remains in the lobby without checking in, it can raise concerns. We have had situations in the past where individuals attempted to access the property without authorization. Several guests exchanged quiet looks as he spoke. Marcus listened patiently, the calm expression on his face unchanged. Gregory continued, now sounding more certain as he followed the familiar language of management reports and internal policies. "So when I saw you standing near the seating area earlier tonight, I made the decision to approach you and determine whether you were a registered guest." Marcus nodded again. "Yes," he said quietly. Gregory seemed relieved to hear agreement. "Exactly," he said. Marcus tilted his head slightly. "And when you approached me," he said, "what happened next?" Gregory hesitated. The moment replayed quickly in his mind. Marcus continued before he could answer. "You asked if I had a reservation." Gregory nodded slowly. "Yes." Marcus kept his eyes on him. "Then you said something else." Gregory swallowed. He remembered the exact words, but repeating them now felt uncomfortable. Marcus helped him. "You said this hotel is for real guests." The words hung in the air. A faint murmur passed through the guests standing nearby. Gregory shifted again. "That was not the intention behind the statement," he said quickly. Marcus remained calm. "What was the intention?" Gregory opened his mouth, then paused. Emily Brooks felt her hands tightening around the edge of the counter again. She remembered the moment clearly as well. The entire lobby had heard it. Marcus did not press him immediately. Instead, he glanced once more around the room as though studying the building again. "This property opened nearly 30 years ago," he said quietly. Gregory blinked, surprised by the sudden change in direction. Marcus continued speaking. "When my company acquired it 6 years ago, the renovation team spent months redesigning the lobby." Gregory nodded slowly. "Yes." Marcus gestured lightly toward the marble floors. "These tiles came from northern Italy," he said. "Each one cut and polished before being installed here." The guests glanced down at the floor as if seeing it for the first time. Marcus continued in the same calm voice. "The chandeliers were custom-built in Ohio. The brass railings were restored instead of replaced." Gregory listened carefully now, unsure where the explanation was leading. Marcus looked back at him. "Every detail was chosen for a reason," he said. Gregory nodded again. Marcus smiled faintly. "Not because luxury requires decoration," he added, "but because luxury requires intention." The guests watching began to understand what he meant. Marcus rested his hand gently on the marble counter again. A hotel like this sends a message the moment someone walks through the door, he said. Gregory said nothing. Marcus continued. The design says you are welcome. The lighting says you are comfortable. The service should say you are respected. The words settled quietly into the room. Marcus looked directly at Gregory again. That is the atmosphere you said you were protecting. Gregory felt the pressure of every person listening. Yes, he said softly. Marcus nodded. Then let us talk about atmosphere. Gregory stiffened slightly. Marcus continued in the same measured tone. Because atmosphere is not only built with architecture. He gestured toward the entrance again. It is built in moments. Small ones. The kind that last only a few seconds. Gregory felt the tension return to his chest. Marcus continued. Moments like when a guest walks through the door and the staff decides whether that guest belongs. A woman near the staircase folded her arms quietly. Daniel Park's phone remained steady as he continued recording. Gregory tried again to regain control of the conversation. Mr. Carter, I understand the point you are making, he said. But there are practical realities in hospitality. Staff members must make quick judgments to maintain order. Marcus nodded slowly. Judgment, he repeated. Gregory looked encouraged again. Exactly. Marcus held his gaze. Judgment is a powerful tool, he said calmly. Gregory waited. Marcus's voice remained steady, almost reflective. But judgment is only useful when it is guided by the right standards. Gregory hesitated. Marcus continued speaking before he could respond. Earlier tonight you said this hotel maintains certain standards, he said again. Gregory nodded cautiously. Marcus leaned forward slightly on the counter. The question that interests me, he said, is what those standards actually mean to the people responsible for enforcing them. The room felt quieter than ever. Marcus continued. Because when I walked through that door tonight, I saw something very specific. Gregory felt the tension in his chest tighten again. What did you see, he asked. Marcus looked at him calmly. I saw a manager making a decision about who belonged in his lobby. Gregory tried to respond immediately. I did not say you did not belong here, he said quickly. Marcus tilted his head slightly. You did not use those exact words, he agreed. Gregory relaxed for half a second. Marcus continued speaking. But your decision said it very clearly. The quiet murmur among the guests grew slightly louder now. Gregory's face flushed. You are interpreting my actions unfairly, he said. Marcus remained calm. I am interpreting your decision, he replied. Gregory struggled to maintain his composure. You arrived wearing casual clothing and remained in the lobby without checking in, he said. Marcus nodded. Yes. Gregory gestured lightly toward the seating area again. In a property like this, appearances matter. The sentence left his mouth before he realized how it sounded. Marcus watched him carefully. Appearances matter, he repeated slowly. Gregory immediately tried to adjust the statement. I mean professional appearance. Guest presentation. Marcus nodded once, acknowledging the correction. Of course, he said. The calmness in his voice somehow made the moment even heavier. Marcus looked directly at Gregory again. Let me ask you one more question, he said. Gregory felt the attention of the entire room settle on him again. All right, he said carefully. Marcus spoke slowly and clearly. If I had walked through that door tonight wearing a tailored suit instead of a hoodie, he said, would you have made the same decision? The lobby fell silent again as Gregory Whitman realized that answering the question honestly might be more difficult than anything that had happened so far. Gregory Whitman felt the question settle over him like a spotlight that suddenly refused to move. If I had walked through that door tonight wearing a tailored suit instead of a hoodie, would you have made the same decision? The silence in the Aurora Grand lobby stretched so long that even the soft music playing through the speakers seemed to hesitate between notes. Gregory opened his mouth once, then closed it again. The answer that came naturally to him suddenly felt impossible to say out loud. Marcus Carter stood calmly in front of the marble desk, his expression patient, as though he had asked the question many times before in many different rooms. Around them the guests remained still, watching the moment unfold with quiet intensity. Emily Brooks kept her eyes on the computer screen in front of her, but she could feel the entire room leaning toward Gregory, waiting. Gregory cleared his throat again. That is a hypothetical situation, he said carefully. Marcus nodded once. Yes, he replied calmly. Gregory forced a polite smile that did not quite reach his eyes. It is difficult to speculate about circumstances that did not occur. Marcus tilted his head slightly, considering the answer. Interesting, he said quietly. Gregory felt a small wave of relief pass through him, hoping the conversation might move on. But Marcus remained where he was, his attention steady. Hospitality is built on reading situations, Marcus continued. You said that earlier. Gregory nodded cautiously. Yes. Marcus rested his hand lightly on the marble counter again. So let us examine the situation that did occur. Gregory felt the tension returning immediately. Marcus continued speaking in the same calm voice that had controlled the room since the beginning. A man walks into the lobby of a hotel you manage. Gregory said nothing. He does not cause a disturbance, Marcus said. He does not interrupt anyone. He stands quietly near the seating area. Gregory shifted slightly behind the desk. Marcus continued. Within minutes, the manager approaches him. Gregory looked down briefly at the marble surface before looking back up again. Marcus kept his gaze steady. The manager decides that the man does not belong in that space. Gregory felt the attention of every person in the lobby settle on him again. I did not say that, he replied quickly. Marcus nodded slowly. You did not say it directly, he agreed. Gregory leaned forward slightly. Because that was not my intention. Marcus watched him calmly. Intention is important, he said quietly. Gregory nodded eagerly. Exactly. Marcus's expression remained thoughtful. But outcomes are also important. Gregory hesitated. Marcus continued speaking. Because the outcome of that moment was very clear. He gestured lightly toward the security guard who still stood a few feet away. You asked security to remove me from the lobby. The guard shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware that he had become part of the story being told. Gregory glanced at him briefly before looking back at Marcus. That was standard procedure, he said. Marcus nodded once. Yes, he replied. Gregory straightened slightly. Staff members are trained to ensure that only authorized individuals remain in guest areas. Marcus considered the explanation for a moment. Authorized individuals, he repeated. Gregory nodded. Marcus gestured lightly toward the front desk monitors behind Gregory. The red banner was still glowing across every screen. Marcus Carter. Owner access granted. According to the system, Marcus said quietly, I was authorized the entire time. Gregory felt the statement land with uncomfortable precision. The system had not yet been checked, he said quickly. Marcus nodded again. That is correct, he said. Gregory relaxed slightly. Marcus continued. Instead, you relied on something else. Gregory frowned slightly. What do you mean? Marcus looked directly at him. You relied on what you believed you were seeing. The sentence settled over the room. Gregory felt his chest tighten again. Managers are expected to make quick assessments, he said defensively. Marcus did not argue. Yes, he said calmly. Gregory continued speaking, now sounding more determined to justify his actions. When someone enters a high-end property dressed casually and remains in the lobby without checking in, it raises questions. Marcus nodded once more. Questions, he repeated. Gregory gestured lightly toward Marcus's hoodie and sneakers. This is not a casual hotel, he said. The words hung in the air. Several guests shifted uncomfortably again. Marcus glanced down briefly at his clothing before looking back up at Gregory. No, he said quietly. It is not. Gregory seemed encouraged by the agreement. Exactly, he said. Marcus's expression remained calm. It is a luxury hotel, he continued. Gregory nodded. Marcus took a slow breath before speaking again. Which means the people working here represent something larger than themselves. Gregory said nothing. Marcus continued. They represent the values of the property. The room remained silent as he spoke. Marcus leaned slightly closer to the desk. That is why moments like this matter so much, he said. Gregory felt the weight of the statement immediately. Marcus continued in the same steady voice. Because the values of a place are revealed most clearly when someone unexpected walks through the door. Gregory's shoulders stiffened again. Mr. Carter, with respect, you are analyzing a routine situation as though it were something extraordinary. Marcus smiled faintly. Routine, he repeated. Gregory nodded. Yes. Marcus studied him for a moment. If this was routine, he said quietly, that concerns me even more. Gregory blinked in surprise. The guests around them murmured softly again. Marcus continued. Because routine behavior defines the culture of a place. Gregory felt his confidence slipping further. Our culture is built on professionalism, he said firmly. Marcus nodded once. That is what interests me, he replied. Gregory frowned slightly. Why? Marcus looked around the lobby again before answering. Because professionalism is not measured by how staff treat the people they recognize. Gregory remained silent. Marcus's voice stayed calm, but carried unmistakable clarity. It is measured by how they treat the people they do not recognize. The words settled across the marble floor like a quiet verdict. Emily Brooks felt a chill run through her arms as she listened. Gregory struggled to find a response. "You are suggesting that my staff treated you unfairly," he said finally. Marcus shook his head slightly. "I am not suggesting anything," he replied. Gregory frowned. Marcus continued speaking. "I am observing." Gregory's voice tightened. "Observing what?" Marcus met his eyes calmly. "A moment that tells me more about this hotel than any financial report ever could." The guests watching seemed to lean closer again. Marcus rested both hands lightly on the counter now, his posture relaxed but unmistakably steady. "The truth about luxury service," he said quietly, "is that it has nothing to do with marble floors or expensive chandeliers." Gregory felt the tension building again. Marcus continued. "Luxury service begins with a very simple decision." Gregory swallowed. "What decision?" he asked. Marcus held his gaze. "The decision to treat every person who walks through the door as if they belong there." The room fell silent once more. Gregory Whitman stood behind the desk, realizing that the question Marcus had asked earlier was no longer hypothetical at all. Gregory Whitman stood frozen behind the marble desk as Marcus Carter's final sentence settled across the lobby like the quiet closing of a door. The decision to treat every person who walks through the door as if they belong there. No one in the room spoke. Even the soft music drifting through the speakers seemed to fade beneath the weight of the moment. Gregory felt the eyes of the guests, the staff, and even the security guard all focused on him at once. He straightened his posture slowly, attempting to recover the authority he had worn earlier that evening. "Mr. Carter," he said carefully, "I believe we may be approaching this conversation from different perspectives." Marcus Carter remained calm, his hands resting loosely in the pockets of his hoodie, his expression thoughtful rather than angry. "Explain," Marcus said quietly. Gregory nodded, grateful for the invitation to regain control of the narrative. "Hospitality is a complicated environment," he began. "Managers must balance openness with responsibility. We cannot simply assume that every person who enters the building has legitimate intentions." Marcus listened without interruption. Gregory continued speaking, gaining confidence as he returned to familiar managerial language. "Our responsibility is to ensure that the environment remains comfortable for our guests. That sometimes requires making quick decisions based on the information available." Marcus nodded once. "Yes," he said calmly. Gregory gestured lightly toward the lobby around them. "This hotel hosts business leaders, public figures, international travelers. Security awareness is part of the job." The businessman near the concierge desk raised an eyebrow slightly, but remained silent. Marcus tilted his head slightly, as though considering the explanation carefully. "Security awareness," he repeated. Gregory nodded. "Exactly." Marcus looked around the lobby again, letting his eyes move slowly across the seating area, the polished brass railings, the quiet group of guests who had now gathered near the front desk. "You know," Marcus said thoughtfully, "I have visited many luxury properties around the country." Gregory listened cautiously. Marcus continued. "Some of them belong to my company. Others belong to competitors. But the best hotels always have one thing in common." Gregory waited. Marcus looked back at him. "The staff never assumes that a guest does not belong." The words landed softly but carried unmistakable clarity. Gregory felt his shoulders tighten again. "Respectfully," he replied, "we did not know you were the owner." Marcus nodded. "That is true," he said. Gregory leaned slightly forward. "If we had known, this situation would never have occurred." Several guests exchanged quiet glances when he said it. Marcus noticed the reaction immediately. "That is precisely the problem," Marcus said calmly. Gregory frowned. "I do not follow." Marcus rested one hand on the marble counter again. "You are suggesting that the outcome would have been different if you had known who I was." Gregory nodded quickly. "Of course." Marcus's voice remained steady. "But the outcome should not depend on who I am." Gregory blinked. Marcus continued speaking in the same calm tone that had controlled the room since the beginning. "The standard should be the same for everyone." The security guard shifted slightly where he stood. Emily Brooks felt a quiet wave of relief pass through her chest, hearing the words spoken so clearly. Gregory attempted to respond again. In theory, that is correct, he said cautiously. But in practice, there are always contextual factors. Marcus raised an eyebrow slightly. Contextual factors, he repeated. Gregory nodded. Yes. Marcus studied him carefully. Let us talk about context then, he said. Gregory remained silent. Marcus continued. When I entered the lobby earlier tonight, I stood near the seating area for several minutes. Gregory nodded slowly. Yes. Marcus gestured toward the same chairs where he had been standing earlier. During that time, several guests walked past me. Gregory said nothing. Marcus continued. Some of them glanced at me briefly. Some of them did not notice me at all. Daniel Park lowered his phone for a moment, then raised it again as the conversation deepened. Marcus looked directly at Gregory. You noticed me immediately. Gregory hesitated. Yes. Marcus nodded. You approached me within 2 minutes. Gregory nodded again. Marcus continued speaking calmly. Then you asked whether I had a reservation. Gregory said nothing. Marcus held his gaze. When I did not immediately produce a confirmation number, you made a decision. Gregory shifted again behind the desk. Marcus continued. You decided that I did not belong in your lobby. Gregory shook his head quickly. That is not what I decided. Marcus remained calm. Then help me understand what you did decide. Gregory paused. The entire lobby seemed to lean toward him again, waiting for the explanation. He finally spoke. I decided that it was necessary to verify your presence. Marcus nodded slowly. Verify, he repeated. Gregory nodded. Marcus glanced again at the monitors behind the desk where the red ownership banner continued glowing. And yet the system that verifies guest authorization was never checked before you called security. Gregory's expression tightened slightly. Marcus continued speaking before he could respond. You relied on observation instead. Gregory nodded reluctantly. Marcus tilted his head again. Observation based on what? Gregory hesitated. Marcus waited patiently. The silence stretched across the room once more. Finally, Gregory spoke quietly. Professional presentation. The phrase sounded carefully chosen. Marcus nodded once. Professional presentation, he repeated. Gregory continued quickly, trying to clarify. Luxury hospitality requires a certain appearance standard. Marcus looked down briefly at his hoodie and sneakers before looking back up again. And you believed I did not meet that standard? Gregory hesitated before answering. Yes. The admission hung in the air like a quiet confession. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. I appreciate the honesty, he said calmly. Gregory looked relieved for a moment. Marcus continued. But it reveals something important. Gregory frowned slightly. What does it reveal? Marcus looked around the lobby one more time. It reveals how easily perception can replace policy. The guests nearby murmured softly again. Marcus looked back at Gregory. Your policy says every guest should be treated with respect. Gregory nodded. Marcus's voice remained calm but precise. But your perception told you that I did not belong here. Gregory felt the weight of the statement immediately. Marcus continued speaking. So instead of verifying the information first, you acted on that perception. Gregory attempted to respond again. I believed I was protecting the environment of the hotel. Marcus nodded slowly. Yes, he said. Gregory straightened slightly. That is my responsibility. Marcus studied him quietly for a moment before answering. The responsibility of leadership is not to protect the environment from people who appear different, he said. Gregory felt the tension building again. Marcus finished the thought calmly. It is to protect the values that define the environment in the first place. The words settled across the marble lobby like the quiet conclusion of an argument that no one in the room could easily dismiss. Marcus Carter's final words settled across the marble lobby like the quiet toll of a bell that could not be unheard. The responsibility of leadership is not to protect the environment from people who appear different. It is to protect the values that define the environment in the first place. Gregory Whitman stood behind the front desk with his hands resting on the polished marble surface, but the posture that had once looked confident now felt like someone holding onto a railing in rough water. The room remained silent. The guests gathered near the lobby seating area were no longer whispering. They were simply watching. Daniel Park's phone continued recording steadily, the small red light reflecting faintly in the polished brass trim behind the desk. Marcus Carter remained calm, his voice measured, his expression composed. For several seconds he said nothing more. Instead, he looked slowly around the lobby again, as though seeing the building through a different lens than everyone else in the room. The Aurora Grand had been designed to impress people within the first 5 seconds of entering the building. The marble floors, the tall glass doors, the warm lighting, the quiet music. Everything about the space communicated prestige and comfort. But Marcus Carter had spent years studying places like this, and he knew something most people did not. The architecture of luxury could be built in months, but the culture of luxury took years to create and only seconds to damage. Gregory finally spoke again, his voice careful and quieter than before. "Mr. Carter, I understand the principle you are describing." Marcus turned his attention back toward him. Gregory continued, trying to maintain the calm professionalism he had practiced through years of management meetings and corporate reviews. "But there are practical realities in operating a property of this scale." Marcus nodded once, encouraging him to continue. Gregory gestured lightly toward the lobby behind Marcus. "We serve hundreds of guests every day. People from different countries, different industries, different expectations." Marcus listened without interruption. Gregory continued speaking. "Managers cannot investigate every situation with complete information before taking action. Sometimes decisions must be made quickly." Marcus nodded again. "Yes," he said calmly. Gregory seemed relieved to hear agreement. "Exactly." Marcus tilted his head slightly. "But there is a difference between acting quickly and acting correctly." Gregory's expression tightened again. Marcus continued speaking in the same steady voice. "Quick decisions are sometimes necessary," he said. "But quick assumptions are dangerous." Several guests nodded subtly when he said it. Marcus continued, "Especially in a place that claims to represent excellence." Gregory felt the words land like a quiet challenge. "I believe our property does represent excellence," he replied. Marcus nodded slowly. "In many ways, it does," he said. Gregory seemed surprised by the concession. Marcus gestured lightly toward the room. "The design is beautiful. The service training is strong. The staff is capable." Emily Brooks felt a small wave of relief hearing that acknowledgement. Marcus continued, "But excellence is not a decoration," he said quietly. Gregory frowned slightly. Marcus looked directly at him. "It is a discipline." The room remained silent again as he spoke. Marcus continued in the same calm tone. "And discipline is tested in the moments when assumptions are easiest to make." Gregory shifted slightly behind the desk. Marcus looked down briefly at the marble counter, then back up again. "Do you know why I visit our properties unannounced?" he asked. Gregory blinked. "Unannounced?" Marcus nodded. "Yes." Gregory hesitated before answering. "To evaluate operations." Marcus smiled faintly. "That is part of it," he said. Gregory waited. Marcus continued speaking. "But the real reason is simpler." He glanced around the lobby again. "People behave differently when they believe no one important is watching." The sentence hung in the air. Gregory felt a small chill move through his chest. Marcus continued calmly. "When executives schedule formal inspections, everyone prepares. The lobby is perfect. The staff is alert. The procedures are flawless." Gregory nodded slowly. Marcus continued. "But when someone walks in wearing a hoodie and sneakers, the real culture of the building appears." Several guests exchanged quiet glances again. Marcus looked back at Gregory. "Tonight I saw something very valuable." Gregory frowned slightly. "Valuable?" Marcus nodded once. "Yes." Gregory seemed confused. Marcus continued speaking. "Not valuable in the way you might expect." Gregory waited. Marcus's voice remained calm but deliberate. "Valuable because it shows me exactly where our training and leadership must improve." Gregory straightened slightly. "Our training programs are highly regarded in the industry," he said defensively. Marcus nodded. "They are," he agreed. Gregory seemed encouraged again. Marcus continued speaking. "But training is not only about procedures." Gregory's confidence faltered again. Marcus gestured lightly toward the security guard standing nearby. "Your security team followed instructions." The guard shifted awkwardly. Marcus continued. "Your receptionist followed system protocols." Emily swallowed quietly. Marcus looked back at Gregory. "But leadership determines how those procedures are interpreted." Gregory felt the implication immediately. "You are suggesting that I interpreted them incorrectly," he said. Marcus remained calm. "I am suggesting that interpretation reveals priorities." Gregory hesitated. Marcus continued speaking. "You believed you were protecting the atmosphere of the hotel." Gregory nodded slowly. Yes. Marcus nodded once in return. But atmosphere does not come from excluding people who appear unfamiliar. Gregory remained silent. Marcus finished the thought quietly. It comes from treating every person with the same respect until the facts say otherwise. The guests watching the conversation seemed to lean closer again. Marcus rested his hand lightly on the marble counter. Tonight the facts were available in the system within seconds, he said. Gregory glanced involuntarily at the glowing monitor behind him again. Marcus Carter. Owner access granted. Marcus continued calmly. But before those facts were checked, a decision had already been made. Gregory exhaled slowly, realizing that every path of defense had quietly disappeared. Marcus studied him for a moment before speaking again. Leadership is not about avoiding mistakes, he said. Gregory looked up. Marcus continued. Everyone makes mistakes. Gregory listened carefully now. Marcus finished quietly. Leadership is about what you choose to learn from them. The lobby remained silent as the weight of the words settled across the polished marble floor, and for the first time that evening Gregory Whitman realized that the conversation had already moved far beyond the moment when security was called. Gregory Whitman stood behind the marble desk as Marcus Carter's final sentence echoed quietly through the lobby. Leadership is about what you choose to learn from mistakes. For a long moment Gregory did not respond. The room had grown so still that the quiet hum of the air conditioning system and the faint clink of glasses from the bar area sounded unusually loud. Guests who had originally intended to walk through the lobby now remained where they were, drawn into the gravity of the conversation without quite realizing it. Marcus Carter remained calm, his posture relaxed, his hands resting easily at his sides, as if patience itself had become part of the atmosphere around him. Gregory inhaled slowly, the breath steady but heavy. Mr. Carter, he said at last, I recognize that this situation has created an unfortunate impression. Marcus did not interrupt. Gregory continued speaking, choosing his words with deliberate care. If any of my actions tonight caused discomfort or misunderstanding, that was certainly not my intention. Marcus nodded once, acknowledging the statement without reacting emotionally. Gregory went on, now sounding less defensive and more formal, as if he were speaking during a corporate review rather than standing in the middle of a crowded lobby. Managing a property of this scale requires constant judgment calls. Sometimes those judgments prove imperfect. Marcus watched him thoughtfully. Gregory's shoulders relaxed slightly as he continued. But every manager must operate within the responsibility of protecting the guests and the reputation of the property. Marcus nodded again. Yes, he said quietly. Gregory seemed encouraged by the calm response. That responsibility is not always simple, he added. Marcus tilted his head slightly. Very few responsibilities worth having are simple, he replied. The words were not confrontational. They were reflective, almost philosophical, and they caused several of the guests standing nearby to exchange quiet glances of agreement. Gregory studied Marcus for a moment, then spoke again. If I may ask something directly, he said carefully. Marcus gestured slightly with his hand, inviting the question. Gregory hesitated briefly before continuing. When you visit your properties like this, without identifying yourself, do you expect situations like this to happen? Marcus's expression remained calm, but something thoughtful passed across his eyes. He glanced briefly toward the tall windows facing the street, where the lights of Manhattan shimmered across the glass like reflections on water. Expect, Marcus repeated softly. Gregory nodded. Marcus took a slow breath before answering. I do not visit properties hoping for problems, he said. Gregory listened closely. Marcus continued speaking in the same steady voice that had guided the entire conversation. But I visit them prepared to learn something. Gregory frowned slightly. Learn. Marcus nodded once. Yes. He looked back around the lobby again, observing the marble floors, the chandeliers, the quiet cluster of guests who had now become witnesses to something larger than a simple misunderstanding. Every building tells a story, Marcus said. Gregory remained silent. Marcus continued. Most of the time that story is told through design and service. But sometimes it is revealed through moments like this. Gregory shifted slightly behind the desk. Marcus spoke again after a brief pause. When someone enters a hotel wearing a suit, the staff usually assumes success. Several guests nodded quietly at the truth of the observation. Marcus continued. When someone enters wearing casual clothes, the staff sometimes assumes uncertainty. Gregory lowered his eyes briefly. Marcus's voice remained calm, never accusatory. Those assumptions are rarely written in training manuals, he said. But they appear in real life more often than people realize. Gregory exhaled slowly, as if recognizing something he had never quite articulated before. Marcus watched him for a moment before continuing. That is why I visit properties unannounced, he said. Gregory looked up again. Marcus finished the thought gently. Because assumptions reveal the true culture of an organization faster than any formal evaluation. The guests around them listened in complete silence now. Daniel Park's phone remained raised, though he had nearly forgotten he was recording. Gregory ran one hand lightly across the marble counter, as if grounding himself in the familiar texture of the desk he had stood behind for years. I understand the principle, he said quietly. Marcus nodded. Gregory looked at him again, this time with less defensiveness and more reflection. But the reality of management often moves faster than reflection, he added. Marcus considered the statement carefully. Speed is useful in hospitality, he said. Gregory nodded. Marcus continued. But clarity is even more valuable. Gregory remained silent. Marcus's voice softened slightly as he spoke again. Because when clarity is missing, people rely on instinct. Gregory felt the weight of that statement immediately. Marcus continued. And instinct is shaped by experience, environment, and sometimes assumptions we do not even realize we carry. The room remained silent as his words settled across the lobby like falling snow. Marcus leaned lightly against the counter now, his tone still calm, but unmistakably thoughtful. When I was younger, he said quietly, I stayed in hotels where people assumed I did not belong. Several guests shifted slightly as they listened. Marcus continued without bitterness. Sometimes those assumptions were spoken out loud. Sometimes they were simply visible in the way someone looked at me. Gregory did not move. Marcus looked around the lobby again. Experiences like that teach you something important, he said. Gregory waited. Marcus's voice remained steady. They teach you how powerful a first impression can be. The businessman near the concierge desk nodded slowly. Marcus continued speaking. That is why I care about moments like this, he said. Gregory swallowed quietly. Marcus looked back at him. Not because of what happened to me personally tonight, he said. Gregory blinked in surprise. Marcus finished calmly. But because of what it teaches about the system that allowed it to happen. The lobby remained silent again. Gregory Whitman stood very still behind the desk, realizing that the conversation had reached a place far deeper than the moment when he first asked security to remove a man wearing a hoodie from the seating area only a few minutes earlier. Gregory Whitman remained silent for several seconds after Marcus Carter finished speaking. The lobby of the Aurora Grand no longer felt like a hotel lobby. It felt more like a quiet courtroom where every person present had become an unspoken witness. The chandeliers above continued to glow softly across the marble floor, but the atmosphere had changed completely from the calm elegance that usually defined the space. Marcus Carter stood in front of the desk with the same calm composure he had maintained since the beginning. He did not rush the moment. He simply allowed the silence to exist. Gregory finally inhaled slowly and spoke again, though the confidence in his voice was no longer the sharp authority it had been earlier in the evening. Mr. Carter, he said carefully, I believe it is clear that the situation tonight unfolded in a way none of us anticipated. Marcus nodded once. Yes, he said quietly. Gregory continued speaking, choosing his words as if each one carried weight. But I want to be clear about something. I have spent many years building this property's reputation. Every decision I have made has been with the goal of protecting the standards of this hotel. Marcus listened without interrupting. Gregory gestured lightly around the room. This lobby, these guests, this environment. They represent the brand that people trust when they walk through those doors. Marcus nodded again, acknowledging the point. Gregory seemed encouraged. And that brand must be protected, he continued. Marcus tilted his head slightly. Protected from what? Gregory hesitated before answering. From anything that could damage the experience of our guests. Marcus studied him thoughtfully. The experience of your guests, he repeated. Gregory nodded firmly. Marcus rested his hand lightly on the marble counter again. Then let us talk about that experience, he said calmly. Gregory said nothing. Marcus continued speaking in the same measured tone that had guided the conversation from the beginning. Imagine you are a guest sitting in this lobby tonight. Several of the people standing nearby shifted slightly when he said it, realizing that they were now part of the example. Marcus gestured toward the seating area where he had stood earlier. You see a man standing quietly near the chairs. Gregory remained silent. Marcus continued. He is not disturbing anyone. He is not raising his voice. He is simply standing there. Gregory nodded slowly. Marcus looked directly at him. Then you watch as the manager approaches him. Gregory swallowed quietly. Marcus continued speaking. The manager decides that the man does not belong in the space. The words settled softly into the room again. Marcus continued. Security is called. The man is asked to leave. Gregory looked down briefly. Marcus finished the scenario calmly. Now imagine you are still sitting in that chair watching everything unfold. Several guests glanced toward the seating area, as if picturing the moment again. Marcus looked at Gregory. What experience do you think that guest just had? Gregory hesitated. Marcus waited patiently. Finally, Gregory spoke. They might assume we were enforcing policy. Marcus nodded slowly. Perhaps, he said. Gregory looked uncertain. Marcus continued speaking. But they might also wonder something else. Gregory looked up. Marcus finished quietly. They might wonder why the decision was made so quickly. The guests nearby nodded almost unconsciously when he said it. Marcus continued. They might wonder what they would have seen if the man had been wearing a different jacket or standing in a different place. Gregory felt the implication immediately. Marcus kept his voice calm. And that question would stay with them long after they left the hotel. The room fell silent again. Gregory ran his hand across the marble counter once more, the smooth surface no longer feeling like the symbol of control it once had. You are suggesting that my decision affected the perception of every person in this lobby, he said quietly. Marcus nodded once. Yes, he replied. Gregory exhaled slowly. Marcus continued speaking. Leadership decisions rarely stay contained within a single moment. Gregory looked up at him again. Marcus's voice remained steady but firm. They ripple outward. The businessman near the concierge desk folded his arms thoughtfully as he listened. Marcus continued. One decision becomes a story. That story becomes an impression. And impressions shape reputation. Gregory listened carefully now. Marcus finished the thought calmly. The very reputation you said you were trying to protect. Gregory closed his eyes briefly, as though realizing the full weight of the moment. When he opened them again, he looked directly at Marcus Carter. Then tell me something honestly, Gregory said. Marcus nodded slightly. Gregory continued. What would you have done differently if you had been standing where I was tonight? The question hung in the air like a challenge, though Gregory's tone no longer carried hostility. It carried something closer to curiosity. Marcus did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked slowly around the lobby one more time, taking in the architecture, the guests, the quiet staff behind the desk, the security guard who had not moved for several minutes. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice remained calm, but carried a clarity that filled the room. The first thing I would have done, he said, is ask a question before making a decision. Gregory listened carefully. Marcus continued. Not a question about whether the person belonged in the hotel. Gregory waited. Marcus finished the thought quietly. A question about how I could help them. The sentence landed gently but powerfully in the quiet lobby. Marcus continued speaking. Hospitality begins with service, not suspicion. Gregory remained silent. Marcus finished calmly. Because when people walk through those doors, they should feel welcomed first and evaluated second. The guests around the lobby exchanged quiet looks of agreement as the weight of the moment settled across the marble floor once again. Gregory Whitman stood quietly behind the marble desk as Marcus Carter's words settled into the atmosphere of the Aurora Grand Lobby. Hospitality begins with service, not suspicion. The sentence seemed simple, yet in that moment it carried the weight of something far larger than the conversation itself. No one in the room moved for several seconds. The soft music continued to drift through the speakers overhead, but the quiet attention of the guests made the space feel unusually still. Marcus Carter remained where he was, his posture relaxed, his expression composed. He did not look like a man who had come to confront anyone. If anything, he looked like someone who had come to observe something important and had now reached the moment where observation was turning into understanding. Gregory finally spoke again, his voice quieter than before, but steady. I see your point, he said. Marcus nodded slightly. Gregory glanced briefly at the guests who were watching, and then back at Marcus. Perhaps tonight unfolded in a way that none of us expected. Marcus considered the statement. That happens more often than people think, he said calmly. Gregory gave a small nod. But I hope you also understand the position of someone responsible for a place like this, Gregory continued. Decisions must sometimes be made quickly. Marcus nodded again. Yes, he replied. Gregory seemed relieved that the conversation had not turned hostile. When people look at a luxury property, they see comfort and elegance, Gregory said. But behind the scenes there are constant concerns about safety, reputation, and guest satisfaction. Marcus listened carefully. Gregory continued speaking. Managers are trained to identify situations that might disrupt the experience guests expect. Marcus tilted his head slightly. And tonight you believed I might disrupt that experience, he said. Gregory hesitated before answering. Yes, he said finally. The admission was simple but honest. Marcus nodded slowly. I appreciate the honesty, he said. Gregory looked surprised by the response. Marcus continued speaking calmly. Honesty is the beginning of improvement. Gregory absorbed the words quietly. The guests standing nearby listened with equal attention, as if the conversation had become something educational rather than confrontational. Marcus rested his hand lightly on the marble counter again and looked around the lobby once more. You know, he said thoughtfully, this building has hosted thousands of people since it opened. Gregory nodded. Marcus continued. Business travelers, families, diplomats, artists, entrepreneurs. Gregory remained silent. Marcus gestured toward the entrance doors. Every person who walks through those doors carries a story with them. The guests listening began to nod slowly, recognizing the truth of the statement. Marcus continued. Some arrive wearing expensive suits. Others arrive wearing travel clothes after long flights. Gregory listened closely now. Marcus spoke calmly. Some people arrive confident. Others arrive uncertain. Gregory nodded slightly. Marcus finished the thought gently. But every one of them deserves to feel welcomed. The room remained silent again as the words settled in. Gregory ran his hand lightly across the marble counter, reflecting on everything that had been said. Perhaps tonight was a reminder of that principle, he admitted quietly. Marcus nodded once. Gregory looked directly at him now. If I had approached the situation differently, we might not be having this conversation. Marcus smiled faintly. Perhaps, he said. Gregory exhaled slowly. Then let me say something clearly, he continued. Marcus waited. Gregory straightened slightly behind the desk, regaining a small measure of the professionalism that had defined his career for years. If my decision earlier tonight made you feel unwelcome in this building, I apologize. The sentence was spoken without hesitation. Several guests exchanged quiet looks of approval. Marcus considered the apology for a moment before nodding. Thank you, he said simply. Gregory seemed relieved that the acknowledgement had been accepted. Marcus continued speaking after a brief pause. But the lesson here is not about my experience tonight. Gregory frowned slightly. Marcus explained calmly. My position in this company means that situations like this eventually correct themselves. Gregory understood what he meant immediately. Marcus continued. The real question is how the same situation would affect someone who does not have that position. The guests listening became very still again. Marcus looked toward the entrance of the lobby, as though imagining another person walking through the doors at that exact moment. Someone traveling alone, he said quietly. Someone who has saved for years to stay in a place like this. Gregory listened carefully. Marcus continued. Someone who simply wants to feel respected when they arrive. Gregory lowered his eyes briefly. Marcus finished the thought in the same calm voice that had guided the conversation all evening. For that person, a moment like this might shape their entire memory of the hotel. The weight of the statement settled over the room again. Gregory Whitman stood quietly behind the marble desk, understanding now that the conversation had never been about a single misunderstanding. It had been about the responsibility that comes with deciding who feels welcome when they walk through the doors of a place that claims to represent excellence. The Aurora Grand lobby remained quiet long after Gregory Whitman finished listening to Marcus Carter's words. The chandeliers continued to glow softly above the polished marble floor, casting warm reflections across the brass railings and the tall windows facing the Manhattan street outside. Yet the elegance of the space now carried a different kind of weight. It was no longer simply a place where guests arrived and departed. For the past 20 minutes, it had become something else entirely. A place where a moment of judgment had unfolded in front of dozens of witnesses, and where the meaning of leadership had been quietly redefined. Marcus Carter stood in the same relaxed posture he had maintained throughout the conversation. He was not angry, and he was not triumphant. If anything, his expression suggested a quiet sense of responsibility, as though he understood that the moment now required something more than reflection. Gregory Whitman remained behind the front desk with his hands resting lightly on the marble surface. The apology he had offered still lingered in the air, and the guests standing nearby seemed to understand that the conversation had reached a turning point. Marcus Carter spoke again after several seconds, his voice calm and measured. "Gregory," he said quietly. Hearing his name spoken in that tone caused Gregory to straighten slightly. "Yes," he replied. Marcus looked at him steadily. "I believe you when you say that protecting the reputation of this hotel has been important to you." Gregory nodded once, grateful that the statement recognized the years he had invested in the property. Marcus continued. "Running a place like this is not simple," he said. "The expectations are high, the pressure is constant, and every decision can affect hundreds of people." Gregory listened carefully. Marcus gestured lightly toward the lobby around them. "But leadership is not only about maintaining standards," he added. Gregory frowned slightly, curious where the thought was leading. Marcus continued calmly. "It is also about recognizing when the standard itself needs to be reinforced." The guests nearby remained completely silent now, aware that something significant was about to be said. Marcus rested both hands lightly on the marble counter. "Tonight revealed something important about this property," he said. Gregory swallowed quietly. Marcus continued. "Not because of a single decision, but because of the system that allowed that decision to happen before the facts were checked." Gregory felt the meaning of the words immediately. Marcus continued speaking in the same steady voice. "The training programs are strong. The building is beautiful. The brand reputation is solid." Gregory nodded slowly. Marcus finished the thought gently. "But culture is shaped by leadership." The sentence settled into the room with unmistakable clarity. Gregory lowered his eyes briefly, understanding the implication. Marcus continued. "When a leader acts on assumptions, the team learns that assumptions are acceptable." Gregory said nothing. Marcus continued. "When a leader slows down and verifies information first, the team learns that accuracy matters more than speed." Emily Brooks, standing behind the desk, felt a quiet sense of relief hearing the principal spoken so clearly. Marcus looked back at Gregory. "Tonight provided a lesson," he said calmly. Gregory nodded slightly. Marcus continued. "And leadership means responding to lessons with action." The guests watching the conversation exchanged quiet glances again, sensing that the moment was approaching its conclusion. Gregory straightened slightly behind the desk, preparing himself for what he suspected might come next. Marcus remained calm as he spoke again. "Gregory Whitman," he said quietly. Gregory met his eyes. Marcus continued. "You have managed this property for several years." Gregory nodded. "Yes." Marcus paused briefly before continuing. "During that time the hotel has performed well financially." Gregory nodded again. Marcus continued. "But financial performance is not the only measure of success." Gregory felt his chest tighten slightly. Marcus finished the thought calmly. "Trust is equally important." The word trust seemed to echo softly in the quiet lobby. Marcus continued speaking. "Guests trust that they will be welcomed here." Gregory said nothing. Marcus continued. "Staff trust that leadership will guide them with fairness." The security guard standing nearby shifted slightly as he listened. Marcus continued. "And ownership trusts that the culture of the property reflects the values of the company." Gregory felt the weight of each word as it landed. Marcus took a slow breath before speaking again. "Tonight showed me that those values need stronger leadership in this building." Gregory understood what was coming before the words were spoken. The realization appeared in his expression a moment before Marcus finished the sentence. "Effective immediately," Marcus said calmly. "Your position as general manager of the Aurora Grand will come to an end." The words were not loud. They did not carry anger or drama. They were spoken with the same calm clarity Marcus had used throughout the entire conversation. For a moment, no one in the room reacted. The guests standing nearby seemed almost stunned by the quiet decisiveness of the statement. Gregory Whitman closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the reality of what had just been said. When he opened them again, he looked directly at Marcus Carter. The tension in his shoulders slowly eased as though the outcome, difficult as it was, had been expected. "I understand," Gregory said quietly. Marcus nodded once, acknowledging the response. Gregory straightened his jacket and stepped away from the desk, no longer trying to defend the decisions that had led to this moment. The lobby remained silent as he stood there for a final second, looking around the building he had managed for years. Marcus Carter remained calm, watching not with hostility but with the steady seriousness of someone who understood that leadership sometimes required decisions that were difficult but necessary. And in the quiet elegance of the Aurora Grand lobby, everyone present realized that the moment they had witnessed would become a story remembered far longer than the misunderstanding that had begun it. The words had already been spoken, and the lobby of the Aurora Grand seemed to absorb them slowly like sunlight settling into marble. Gregory Whitman stood quietly for a moment after hearing Marcus Carter's decision. There was no protest in his expression, no sudden argument, only the quiet realization that the evening had reached its final chapter. The chandeliers above continued to glow softly, reflecting light across the polished floor in long golden streaks that stretched toward the front doors. Outside, the city moved on as it always did, taxis passing, people walking, unaware that inside the building a moment of leadership had just changed the direction of the hotel's future. Gregory adjusted the cuffs of his jacket, the motion small but deliberate. He looked once more around the lobby, the space he had managed for years, the place where thousands of arrivals and departures had happened under his supervision. The marble counters, the quiet seating area, the brass railings of the staircase. For a brief moment, he seemed to take it all in. Then he looked back at Marcus Carter. "I appreciate the clarity," Gregory said quietly. His voice carried no anger, only the calm acceptance of someone who understood that leadership decisions were not always comfortable but were sometimes necessary. Marcus Carter nodded once. He did not raise his voice, and he did not show any triumph. Instead, his expression remained serious, thoughtful, and steady. "Thank you for understanding," Marcus replied calmly. Gregory gave a small nod and stepped away from the desk, no longer the manager standing behind the counter, but simply a man preparing to leave a position he had held for years. As he walked toward the side hallway that led to the administrative offices, the guests in the lobby parted slightly without speaking. No one applauded. No one whispered loudly. The moment carried a quiet respect, as though everyone present understood they had witnessed something that would stay with them long after they left the building. The security guard who had earlier been asked to escort Marcus Carter out of the lobby stood still near the elevator bank, his posture suddenly uncertain. Marcus noticed him and gave a small nod of reassurance, signaling that the man had simply been following instructions. Emily Brooks remained behind the front desk, her hands resting lightly on the keyboard as she watched the hallway where Gregory had disappeared. The silence lingered for several seconds after he was gone. Finally, Marcus Carter turned his attention back toward the desk. The red ownership authorization banner still glowed across the monitors behind Emily. Marcus Carter. Owner access granted. Marcus looked at the screen for a moment before gently tapping the marble counter with his fingertips. "Emily," he said calmly. She straightened immediately. "Yes, sir." Marcus gave a small, reassuring smile. "Please clear the authorization screen." Emily quickly typed several commands, and the red banner disappeared from the monitors, replaced by the normal reservation interface that usually filled the screens. The lobby seemed to exhale quietly as the tension of the evening began to fade. Marcus glanced toward the guests who had remained nearby. Some of them nodded respectfully. Others simply watched him with thoughtful expressions. The businessman near the concierge desk gave a small approving smile before turning back toward the elevators. Daniel Parks slowly lowered his phone, realizing that the moment he had recorded would likely become a story shared far beyond the walls of the hotel. Marcus looked around the lobby one more time, studying the space with the same thoughtful calm he had shown when he first entered the building earlier that evening. The architecture had not changed. The chandeliers still glowed. The marble still reflected the warm light of the lobby. But the atmosphere now carried a renewed sense of clarity, as though the building itself had quietly adjusted its posture. Marcus rested his hands lightly on the counter once more and spoke in the same calm voice that had guided the entire evening. "A hotel like this represents more than comfort," he said. Emily listened carefully. Marcus continued, It represents trust. The security guard near the elevators nodded slowly as he listened. Marcus continued speaking. People walk through these doors expecting more than luxury. They expect dignity. They expect respect. Emily nodded. Marcus finished the thought gently. And those expectations must be honored every single time. The guests still standing nearby listened in silence. Marcus gave one final glance toward the entrance doors, where the city lights shimmered through the glass. Then he straightened and stepped away from the counter. Let us make sure that tonight becomes the reason this hotel grows stronger, he said calmly. Emily nodded with quiet determination. The lobby of the Aurora Grand slowly returned to its usual rhythm as guests resumed their conversations and staff returned to their positions. But everyone who had witnessed the moment understood something important. Leadership had not arrived in the form of anger or spectacle. It had arrived quietly, with patience, clarity, and the simple decision to protect the values that defined the place. And long after the evening ended, the story of what happened in that marble lobby would remain a reminder that dignity does not need to shout to change a room. Sometimes it simply stands still, speaks calmly, and lets the truth do the rest.